Hello and welcome to another edition, in fact, the 10th edition of our exciting and impactful program titled Aligning Education Reforms with National Development. This is Amagate Radio Communications, and I am your host here on the program. My name is Daniel Adebi, and I'm delighted and excited to have you join us even as we move further into this important conversation about the future of education and its vital connection to the growth and prosperity of nations. So last week we looked at a very interesting and insightful topic, which was integrating entrepreneurial consciousness into educational processes. And if by any chance you didn't have the privilege to join us last week, you can please go on our YouTube channel at Amagate Radio Communications and please go and watch and listen. And even if you were part of those that joined last week, you can still take out the time to listen to the program again and also share to your friends and your loved ones. And we'll be moving further this week. We'll be considering another exciting topic, which is actually very, very important, and we need to discuss about it. The topic is educational funding and resource management for national development. Educational funding and resource management for national development. So even as I introduce this topic, I want to start with a quote by Sir Klaus Moser. Sir Klaus says that education is education. We will either pay for the price now or pay the price later. So even as we are talking about educational funding and resource management, we are also talking about the need for nations to pay the price, because if the price isn't paid now, we would pay the price definitely in some other ways that could have a detrimental effect on the nation and on our economy. So investment in education is the cornerstone of national prosperity and resilience. And in fact, research shows that every additional year of schooling increases an individual's earnings by approximately 10%. While nations with higher education levels experience stronger and more consistent economic growth. And this is because they give more attention to their education and also provide adequate funding, to cater for their educational needs. So UNESCO, the United Nations Economic, Scientific, Cultural Organization, highlights that each $1 that is invested in education can yield up to $20 in GDP growth. And this makes it one of the most cost-effective and transformative national investments, which the government and the relevant stakeholders should take notice of, should take very, very important. So despite these proven returns, many countries struggle to allocate sufficient and sustainable funding to education, which is quite unfortunate. And some of the challenges are challenges such as competing, budget priorities, economic shocks and inefficient spendings. All these challenges often undermine the educational development. For example, let's give an instance of the COVID-19 pandemic, which caused a widespread disruption and strained national budgets. It strained the national budget, and it threatened the reverse that was made in access to quality education globally. The COVID-19 actually shut down nations, and in fact the economic the educational sector wasn't left behind. It also experienced or encountered the effect of the pandemic. So this situation basically underscores the need for, in fact, not just the need, an urgent need for an innovative and resilient model, especially a funding model that would not only protect education budgets during crisis, but also promote long-term investment that are aligned with national development goals. Long-term investment that aligns with national development goals that would help to consolidate the educational sector and make it, fireproof, or crisis-proof, or even pandemic-proof, irrespective of the challenge the educational sector is still running. All right, so however, low and middle income countries often face a collective annual funding gap of a huge sum of about $97 billion $97 billion to meet with the United Nations, SDG 4 educational benchmark by 2030. And even sub-Saharan Africa alone requires $70 billion annually to meet up with this benchmark. With the declining aid and growing debt pressures, sustainable educational funding demands innovative and multi-sectoral strategies that will blend stable domestic financing with responsible external investment. This is very, very important. So, before we explore the specific strategies, it is very, very important and very imperative for us to understand that funding education is not just about spending money. It is more about using resources wisely in a way that will create lasting benefits for the whole country. So it is very, very important to understand that proper funding of education, helps to improve the quality of education, and also make sure that every child has access to quality education. It also supports the country's overall growth and development over time. Effective funding and also effective management and efficient use of resources, wise and effective use of resources would help to achieve all this, because what's the need of financing when there is no efficiency in the use of, the financial resources or the resources that have been provided. So we'll be sharing some key strategies that countries use to fund education sustainably. So the first strategy that the countries use to fund education sustainably is by boosting domestic resource mobilization. And how do they do this? Number one, they do this by increasing the national budget for education. Increasing the national budget for education. Government needs to set aside enough money for education. And in fact, UNESCO, the United Nations Economic, Scientific, Cultural Organization, recommends spending between 4% and 6% of the country's total gross domestic product. The country's total economic output of 15% to 20% of government spending should be on education. So UNESCO recommends between 4% and 6% of a country's total economic output, the country's total GDP. And in fact, some countries like Finland and some countries like Singapore are doing more than that. They are spending above 8% of their GDP, which is very, very important. Another way to also boost domestic resource mobilization is by expanding the tax base. Government can, collect more taxes by formalizing businesses that operate informally, without official registration. So when there's more tax revenue means more funds for schools and teachers. And number 3 is debt for education swap. So sometimes there are countries that owe money to other countries in form of debt. So instead of paying all that debt back in cash, they can negotiate to use some of that money to fund educational projects instead. So this is also another way of boosting domestic resource mobilization. And number 4 is education specific tax. Some countries add small taxes that are dedicated for education. I can see an example of that in Ghana. Ghana charges a small percentage on value added tax that are specifically to fund education projects like building of schools and also training of teachers. And finally, under that, we have public financial management. Public financial management reform, it involves improving how government plan and manage public funds and ensuring that these funds, are well utilized and the educational sector gets its fair share and that resources are not wasted or diverted. So those are the various points under the first strategy, which is to boost domestic resource mobilization. Number 2 strategy is to use blended finance models. Use a mix of various finance models. We'll be talking about some points or some models or some strategies under that. Number 1 is combine public and private money Blended finance, basically means mixing government or donor funds with money from private investors. This reduces the risk and encourages private investors to put money into education projects like building of schools or providing digital learning tools. It is very, very important. Number 2 is also by social impact bond, and I will also give an example on that. So when we're talking about social impact bonds, we're talking about investments where private funders put money into education programs and they get paid. They get paid back based on how well the programs perform. For example, if based on the program can help, students can encourage students to increase their attendance or also improve their test scores. They get paid by the government, based on how well these programs perform. And we can see that an example of that in a country called Uganda. You can see an example of that in a country called Uganda. In Uganda, we can see the Educate Girls Development Impact Bond, and it was basically piloted to increase enrollment and learning for the marginalized girls. And this project was very successful, that it exceeded its target and delivered a 52% improvement in learning outcomes, making it one of the most cited examples of successful impact-based financing in education. And number 3, we have credit guarantees. Donors or government promises to cover some of the losses if an education project fails, making banks and investors more willing to lend money for education. So that's credit guarantee. Number 4 is public-private partnership. Governments, should work together with companies to fund and run education programs. For example, in India, we have a corporate fund that helps to improve, schools by providing technology and also training of teachers, and this is made possible by the collaboration between the public and private sector, partnership between public and private sector. And finally, on that strategy, we have encourage philanthropy through matching grants. So matching grant is actually, where government can incentivize private donations by matching the funds that are given by philanthropists or companies, thereby increasing the overall investment in education. And when we talk about matching fund, it's basically like this: private investors or private donations, they donate a certain amount of money. Companies or philanthropists donate us a certain amount of money. Government promises that, okay, whatever you guys donate, or whatever you guys gather up, we will make it double. That means you will pay an extra amount of that exact amount that was generated. And we have this instance that played out in the United States. We have the Challenge Grant Program, and it was done under the United States Department of Education. It used federal matching funds to encourage universities and community partners to raise private funds for scholarship, infrastructure, and research. So when these funds were raised, the government also, whether, let's just say, for example, they were able to raise $10 million, the government also funded an extra $10 million, thereby matching the funds. And also similarly, during the Obama administration invested in innovation funds, and it's basically required guarantees to secure private matching funds to scale up evidence-based educational programs that attracted millions in philanthropic investments. So millions of people donated money and the government matched the funds. And number three strategy which we'll be talking about is to leverage international aid and partnerships. We are still talking about some of the strategies that countries use to fund education sustainably. And number 3 on that list is for governments to leverage international aid and partnerships. And they can do this by number 1, donor fundings. Countries can get financial support from international organizations, international donors like the Global Partnership for Education, the World Bank, or the European Union. These funds will help build schools, will help train teachers, and also buy learning materials. And number 2 is diaspora bond and remittances. So some countries can raise money from their citizens that are living abroad, citizens who want to invest in their homeland's educational system. This is another way to also raise money, to raise funds. And number 3, we'll see aligning international aid with national priorities. So ensuring that donor funds are aligned with the country's own educational plans improves the effectiveness of the donations or the funds that are that are gathered basically, and also avoids various forms of discrepancies or various forms of when there's an alignment with the international aid and the priorities of the nation. For example, the priorities of the economy, educational sector, maybe to build new schools, and other infrastructures, train teachers. So also ensuring that there's an alignment with what is gathered, from in terms of aid internationally to, the efficient disbursements of those funds to cater for those needs in the educational sector. And finally, we'll see building long-term partnership. Multi-year funding agreements provide stability and allows for strategic planning rather than short-term project cycle. So there has to be long-term partnerships with the sources of these international aid, or the sources of this where these funds are coming in. So there has to be a funding agreement that will provide stability, and allow for strategic partnership and also strategic planning, rather than just doing things abruptly and just doing this with short notice. All right, number 4 strategy we would also be looking at is optimizing public spending and efficiency. Optimizing public spending and efficiency, and we are basically looking at the effective use of funding, not just the funding itself, but also the effective use of funding. Number 1, we'll be seeing equity-based funding. This is very, very important, because more money needs to go to schools in poor and rural areas that have fewer resources, so that children in those areas can get a fair share or a fair chance to also learn. So there has to be equity-based funding. Number 2, there needs to be a linking of funds to result. Governments can give more money to schools or districts that improve attendance rates or test scores, or school or regions that build new schools, or schools that were able to compete, whether locally or nationally, just to encourage them for the results they have gotten. And also using technology to track spending. Yes, it's very, very important to ensure efficiency and to ensure accountability. Technology can be implemented to monitor where educational funds go, and making sure that money isn't wasted or lost to corruption. And also number 4, government needs to cut unnecessary costs that are not important, that are not priority. So some countries have merged overlapping programs or reduced administrative expenses to free up more funds for classroom and teachers. So in Rwanda, for example, we see that they use this approach, and they saw primary school completion rates improve significantly, because resources were adequately funded and resources were adequately channeled, and schools were built, and students were encouraged to go to school and complete their primary schools and even move to higher institutions of learning. And number 5, we'll be looking at the final strategy, which is engaging the private sector and philanthropy. Philanthropy, number 1 is by corporate social responsibility. Companies often give money or resources to support education as part of their social commitment. So when the government has to engage the private sector, because private sector also have that corporate social responsibility to also give back to the society, and they do this by supporting education as part of their social commitment. This can include building of schools, providing scholarships, or even donating technology. Number 2 is philanthropic impact investing. So foundations and investors can put money into educational projects that produce social benefits like improving literacy, and also improving the quality of the lives of people. So all this are some of the things that that are involved. So it's very, very important that foundations and investors put money into educational projects that produce social benefits, right? And of course, they'll be expecting some financial returns, but their main aim is to invest in something that will benefit the society. benefit to society. And also number 3, revolving loan funds. So these funds lend money to schools. So these revolving loan funds are lent to schools or communities, and they are needed for improving, and also improving the educational standard, providing resources, and this when these loans are paid back, the money again that is paid back is revolved, is now sent again, is now lent again for another project. So when funds are being sent and are being loaned out to people, or for example educational institution, they are being paid back, and they are also taking the funds that when they are paid back, they are also used to lend to other institutions or other sectors, thereby revolving funds. And number 5, we'll be seeing encouraging employee volunteering programs. So companies can also invest their time and expertise in schools by encouraging staffs to volunteer for tutoring, for mentorship, or for infrastructure projects. It's also something that is very, very, very necessary. And all these are all in the bid to engage the private sector, and also to engage, philanthropy, engage people that want to give, right? So we would be moving to, before we move to that, I want to give the 6th, we'll be looking at the 6th key strategy that countries use to fund education, not just funding education, but also ensuring efficient use or efficient allocation of resources. So I'll just run through that. Number 6, we'll be looking at improving governance, improving monitoring, and ensuring accountability. And all this can be achieved by providing stronger oversight. Government should have independent bodies that check how education funds are being used. Number 2, community involvement. Parents and local community members should be involved in monitoring schools and ensuring transparency, right? Transparency, very, very important. Number 3 is digital tracking system. In Kenya, you have the Kenya's National Education Management Information System, and these systems help to track school budgets and their spending, in real time, to avoid delay and to avoid misuse. Number 4 is also to provide transparent, procurement, making schools, school-related projects, to be clear and to be transparent, for people to see. People must know how they spent the money, so there must be a high level of transparency. And number 5, regular audits and public reporting. Reporting is very, very important. So audits and regular audits and regular, reporting should be necessary. And in fact, publishing these audit results and spending reports also helps build public trust. It also helps to foster a sense of accountability. So moving forward, I want to talk about some of the advantages of strategic education funding, and I'll be giving some case studies to go with them. Number 1 is that it helps to promote long-term economic growth. So countries that prioritize education investments, they experience faster and more inclusive economic growth. So when there's adequate funding, of course the educational system will be solid, and of course it will have a ripple effect, because people are getting qualitative information, qualitative empowerment as per education, and when they're empowered, they can now contribute effectively and meaningfully to the economy. For example, in South Korea, after the Korean War, South Korea heavily funded basic education and vocational training. And we can see as a result of that heavy funding, even just coming out from war, they decided to fund education. And today the country has one of the highest tertiary enrollment rates, and over 96% of students enrolled in universities and other tertiary institutions. And they also ranked top among the top 15 global economies, the top 15 economies even globally. Right. So number 2 advantage of strategic educational funding is poverty reduction. poverty reduction when people are learned, when people are effectively and empowered with education. They would be able to to get a job. They would also be able to come up with businesses and and concept or basically means of livelihood to sustain them. So thereby reducing the rate of poverty. And according to the World Bank, each additional year of schooling reduces the possibility of poverty by 9%. So as people are advancing in their education, the probability of them becoming poor reduces by 9%, which is very, 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 very insightful. That World Bank statistics that each additional year of schooling reduces the probability of poverty by 9%. For example, we look at a country like Vietnam. In Vietnam, strong public investment in universal basic education helped to reduce poverty rates from 58% in the 1990s to as low as 6% in 2020. And this is made possible by a strong public investment in universal basic education. And number 3 is it promotes innovation and workforce readiness. Effective and strategic educational funding helps to promote innovation and workforce readiness. Funded educational systems generate a skilled, adaptable workforce. And for example, in Finland, we can see in Finland, like I said in the introduction, Finland, dedicates over and invests over 6%, even up to 8% of its GDP in education, and it is known for world-class performance in PISA ranking. It's a ranking that is done in Europe, and all this can be achieved by a strong innovation, a strong funding of education, and also not just strong ranking in PISA examinations, but also they're also been able to have a strong innovation-based economy because they have people that have been educated and enlightened and empowered, they have a skilled workforce. A skilled and adaptable workforce. Number 4 is that it also promotes social stability and equality. Equalities and social stability and equality is another advantage of strategic education funding. So investment in education promotes gender parity, promotes social mobility, and also civic engagement. And we see an example in Rwanda. In Rwanda, equitable financing and policy reforms in education helped increase girls' secondary school enrollment from 17% in the year 2000 to 39% in the year 2021. Wow, this is very, very beautiful. It also helps to reduce post-genocide tension through civic education. So it helps to ensure social stability and also equality. And number 5, we see that another advantage of strategic education funding is that it promotes national reputation and global competitiveness. I also give an example of a country like Singapore in the beginning when I was introducing Singapore. A country like Singapore allocates substantial investment per student, and for every student in Singapore, they allocate about $11,000 funding for students per year in Singapore, and they have built a globally respected system that attracts foreign students, attract foreign talent and foreign investments, making education a pillar of national branding. So when you're talking about Singapore, one of the things that you would talk about as per Singapore is education. That is actually one of their strengths, and that they've been able to create a national brand around education. And all these are very, very important. So we are speaking to the fact that there is need for there to be strategic and intentional education funding, for nations. We have been talking about for the past, 9 weeks, we're talking about various aspects of policy reforms that could happen, that can be done in the educational system. I've talked about, various things, but I mean, we can keep going on talking about all these things, but if the funding is not available, if governments or stakeholders in the educational sector don't, provide effective funding to run the educational sector, then there will be a problem. There will be a disparity, between whatever policies or whatever things or strategies or whatever innovations that have been said to be done, compared to what is actually on ground. That disparity, because money and funding are important. And like I said in the beginning, I gave a quote by Sir Klaus Moser. He said, "Education is education. We will either pay the price now or pay the price later." So government and regular necessary stakeholders in the educational sector needs to understand the place of paying the price. I would want to move further by concluding like this. Funding education is not merely an expenditure, but it is a strategic investment that shapes the future of nations. Sustainable and equitable educational financing is essential, very important to unlocking human potential, very important to driving economic growth and fostering social cohesion. The evidence is very clear. Countries that prioritize and innovate in education funding dividends in poverty reduction, workforce readiness, innovation, and national stability. Yes, the challenging aspect remains that without a concerted effort to mobilize domestic resources, harness private investment, and optimize spending efficiency, and all strengthen governance, if all these things are not done, it is challenging to know that millions would risk being left behind. And when millions are left behind, nations are also left behind. The global community must embrace collaborative strategies that secure education funding in ways that are resilient to economic shocks and are aligned with national and long-term national development goals. I want to end with a quote by a great man called Nelson Mandela. As Nelson Mandela profoundly stated, he said, that education is the most powerful weapon with which you can change the world. So investing wisely in education today is an investment in sustainable, inclusive growth and prosperity for generations to come. It is on this note we bring today's edition to an end. Thank you for listening. Please do well to send your questions and your contributions. You can reach out to us via our email at contact@theamogate.org, or you can reach out to us via our social media platforms. We're on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. You can reach us at Amogate. And on YouTube, you can listen to us. You can listen to our daily, programs running from Mondays down to Fridays. Every day, 5 p.m. West African time and 12 noon Eastern time. Our handle on YouTube is at Amogate Radio Communications. So we would love to hear from you. We would love to hear your feedback, and we'd love to, to see you again next week, same time, same platform here on YouTube. Please join me next week, Thursday, even as we go further to also explore another different but yet inciting and exciting, topic. So till I come your way next week, Thursday, my name is Daniel Adebi. Do have a beautiful week ahead. Bye for now.